I'm Victor Kasik, interviewing Dr. Amy Coren.
Hi, Victor. Okay, so what questions do you have for me today?
Um, my investigative research essay is about how social media influence specifically teenagers, but all around the scope, and I'm just trying to get sort of your perspective
Okay.
on the whole issue.
Sure.
One of my questions is, why do you think social media has had such a strong impact in teenagers' lives?
I think, okay, so this current group of adolescents grew up as the quote unquote digital natives, so it's always been there for them. I don't think they really think that it's something external to their life that has an impact, but rather it is just part of their life. For them, it's as natural as interacting with somebody in real life. Like, it's always been there, it's always been present, so they don't really understand it as being something that's separate and apart. So I think it looks to us like it has this big impact, but in fact it's something that's just like so much part of their existence that they don't know, they don't perceive it that way. They wouldn't say it has an impact. They're like, well, that's just how you communicate, right? I think that it's had an impact as a whole with society, and it probably influences how this generation acts, because now everything is public. There really is no private sphere anymore. The de facto mode is to be public. Yeah, and I think that has an impact. Yeah.
Okay. How do you think social media has affected teenagers' self-esteem / self-worth?
So what we've seen from the research point of view is that it does tend to negatively impact self-esteem. In particular, Instagram, Facebook are two of the social media platforms that have been researched extensively for their links with depression. So it actually has a pretty negative impact for most people. Other social media platforms like Twitter have much less of an impact, but as we've seen with the way that like Twitter wars can go, they can still have a pretty negative emotional impact. I think when you look at negative impacts, you have to separate them into self-esteem issues that are based off like beauty stereotypes, and then self-esteem issues that are based off of sort of emotional perceptions of self-worth. So getting attacked on Twitter, you're not going to get attacked for how you look, but you'll get attacked for kind of your character and who you are. If you take like Instagram or Snapchat, less so because of the way that they handle their videos, like they kind of go away. But the point is anything that's permanent, if it's something with a picture, then you're being based off like what you look like and what you're doing and off of the context that people see. So I think that how it negatively impacts you depends on the social media platform you're looking at, but we do know from the research that there are absolute links to increased anxiety, depression, driving some issues with self-esteem, suicidal ideation, etc.
And do you think this negative impact that you speak about is more prominent on males or females, or biological males or females?
I had some students who once did a project on that very question, and while they didn't find anything statistically significant, I think that it tends to impact women more, but that's not social media. Women tend to be much more impacted by society in general,
yeah.
Because of the fact that how women are looked at is largely sort of from a public eye. With men also face challenges from society, but it's much, much subtler in terms of how it manifests. I think men are impacted a little bit by social media, but it's not to the same extent. No, I don't think so.
Okay. Why do you think, going back to more as in why it has such an impact on teenagers' lives, what do you think teenagers crave about social media that makes them use it so frequently?
I think it goes back, sorry, I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning. I think that they they use it because it's just the way that you're supposed to communicate, and they don't know any different. We do know for anybody, from a biological perspective, it can become addicting in the same way that it causes, in the same way that like caffeine or let's say drugs can become addicting. And what that means is anytime you get a text message or something, your phone buzzes, you notice it causes a small dopamine surge in the reward centers, and our brain likes it when that happens, so we want it to keep happening. So we pick up our phone and we look at it, we put something else down, and it feeds itself. It feeds its own compulsion. So I think that there's biological mechanisms that go on with heavy social media usage, and like I said, these guys have been kind of doing it from birth. That's how they're wired, almost.
Yeah, that was actually my next question, and the follow-up question to that is, which you kind of answered, do you think it's more biological or physiological?
Okay, physiological is biological.
Oh my God.
You want psychological.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. But no, that's fine. I do think that there's a huge physiological and biological component to it. I think that's what perpetuates the behavior. But I think on the psychological side too, there's a lot of context. I mean, social media usage differs depending on culture, right? And so I think you can't, and how it affects people differs cross-culturally as well. So I don't think you can say that it's all just biological. There's clearly something about American society that also, helps it perpetuate its usage among...
Yeah, like kind of promotes it.
Exactly. I think we promote it. I think we're embedded within... I have a friend of mine who's not American who calls it, like, not in a negative way, but just in like a fact. He's like, you guys are so embedded in this consumer culture, like everything about it is really about consumption. It always is. And he's like, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's so different than like where he comes from in Eastern Europe. He's like, yes, we consume, but it's a totally different viewpoint. And their social media to some extent actually does reflect that. Like when you start following people there versus here. But I mean, for adolescents though, they're different. So I think that nonetheless, context and environment plays a big role as well in terms of how often you use it and what types of things you put up, and then perhaps what the impacts are. We don't have a lot of cross-cultural data right now.
Tell me about how you think social media has affected your students.
Well, I actually really don't know. I'm sure it's distracting. I think it affects my students just like it affects any other adolescents, honestly, their age. I'm sure some of them like it, some of them hate it, some of them feel like they hate it, but they have to use it. I don't really know if it's like had an impact on how they learn or how they interact with me. The only thing I could say, but this isn't social media specific, and this is not just me, a lot of professors echo this. Everybody is so comfortable with social media and the informality of social media that some of the emails we get are very inappropriate to send a professor. You should never start out with like, hey, I missed class, so what did I miss? With like no signing your name or anything else. That's something you would text your friend.
Yeah.
That's not something you text you email your professor. I'm sorry, it's just not. And so sometimes I think that maybe what it's done is it's created a more informal culture in general. And I'm not a huge stickler for formality, but I do think like if you just don't know somebody, it can feel very violating and personal if you just come at somebody with this informal tone. And I think that that's a generational difference. I think that that's something that you really see between these like digital natives and everybody else. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I read that one of your research interests was bullying and /victimization. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me about how you think social media negatively affects that?
Yes, I can. So what's interesting is this is both Hungarian and US data. Okay, so what we have seen is that social media absolutely does affect this whole bullying question, because now, instead of leaving like the scene of where the bullying occurs, the school, the bullying follows the student everywhere. They can be bullied. They can be bullied physically at school or in person, and then they go home and they're bullied online. But the thing is, what we still see, though, that traditional bullying is 2 times more prevalent than cyberbullying. Okay, so it's not that every bully in a school goes and cyberbullies, and that's just not how it happens. What we need to look at is, what is the prevalence of people who bully in a school and then go on to continue to bully that victim outside of the school. The reason I think that cyberbullying does have yes, it does have an impact, but what we also found is that students that we interviewed don't really think of bullying and cyberbullying as 2 separate forms of violence. Again, because they're so embedded within this digital world, for them it's just like the bullying's 24 hours. But they don't think of it as like, I go and I'm bullied at school and then I'm also bullied. They're just like, I'm bullied. And when we ask them how, they're like, well, it can be at school some days it's online. They don't perceive it as being like 2 different things. So sometimes when students tell us they're bullied, unless we ask, it could be cyberbullying, it could be traditional bullying. But I do think social media has an impact because, at least for some people, it gives them even more of an audience, which is what bullying's about. It's about power. It gives them even more of an audience to bully a particular victim.
And you said they think of it as the same thing.
They think of it as the same thing. But we are talking, we like to make it different because of the different platforms, but they perceive all of it as like, well, it's just bullying. Like, I'm being bullied.
Yeah. Do you think bullying in person is worse or outweighs cyberbullying per se?
I don't think so. So the thing with I don't think so. Mm-hmm. The reason is, with traditional bullying, you really have a limited audience, right?
Yeah.
So you have, the people who are there, the people who aid the bully by being like the passive bystanders and all of that. Okay. So you have that. But if you took social media out of the question completely and took cyberbullying out of the question completely, at the end of the day, the victim goes home, the bully goes home, and the audience never gets wider than just the school, okay? And really at the school, just certain individuals. With cyberbullying, though, things can go viral. Suddenly, you're not just a victim in front of 20 people, you're a victim in front of 20,000. And I do think that makes the humiliation that much worse. Nice. It also gives the bully a much higher percentage of like power or feeling of power, I should say. So I would say that I think that cyberbullying is worse because it opens the playing field a lot more. And it can bring in and attract other bullies too, who then can ally with the original bully and sort of, continue to bully the victim.
Yeah, that's one of my questions. Do you think bullying over the internet or cyberbullying per se is like a vessel for like it increases more bullying?
I don't think it increases it. I think it could increase it in that people now feel like they might have allies. But the thing is, we don't see like bullying communities like, hey man, you're a bully. Me too. That's awesome. How did you bully your victim today? I mean, we haven't come across that. So I don't think that's a good question because people have done a lot of research on how the internet promotes, this sort of in-group feeling among people who were previously just maybe one person in their community. Now suddenly they have found a community online that can span, an entire country. So and we know that those people do talk and communicate. But in this case, we haven't seen any forums where this goes on because of the sort of etiology of bullying, like where it comes from and everything else. There just wouldn't be a community for this, or at least not in my opinion. I think that, I think I wouldn't say it makes it worse. It's just different.
Could you say that there's any positives with social media? against cyberbullying? Let's say like
Yeah,
support groups, communities.
Well, I do think that, yeah, support groups, communities, I think that people are more likely to stand up, like bystanders are more likely to stand up and say something, again, because of the anonymity of the internet, so they can say something in support of the victim without having to, I don't know, worry about being in the victim role themselves. And I think for the victims, I think, yeah, there's a lot of good support. They do find themselves in communities, on the internet forums where they're like, I was a victim of bullying, and other people are like, I was too, and they do find solidarity in those groups. So I think that that's a positive thing. I think also, social media can be used to. I need too much. I think that social media can be used to highlight problems that exist, that to sort of bring this concept of bullying into the public consciousness as something that should not be considered normal, should not be normalized, should be actively fought against. Yeah.
Do you think victimization on social media is a prominent issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do actually. This is not a bullying case, but in the news recently, there was the guy who was filmed shaving on. He was like on the train. He was a homeless guy, but he was trying to clean up for like an interview. So basically, this other person on the train like filmed this guy like shaving and basically put it on social media and was kind of shaming this guy, like, what the heck, you're shaving and just like flicking your stuff, whatever. And there was two camps. There was the camp that kind of went along with the shaming, which is shaming is a form of bullying, whether or not people want to call it that, it is. And then there was another camp who were like, hey, wait a minute, this is not that funny. Why do we find it funny to like film people without their knowledge and then, basically tear them apart on a international platform? Like, you don't know those people. You don't know what that guy's story is and blah, 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 blah. For the guy himself, he's like, well, that sucks, and you don't know the full story, and it's embarrassing for me, and blah blah blah. And I mean, he doesn't feel very good about it. So, I think that, yeah.
Well, in some cases, we've seen like false GoFundMe pages, or maybe some people too. Portraying themselves as in need and help, and like they receive money. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so and we have that as well. Like, people can get up there and sort of present themselves however they want, and yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Amy Coren.
Absolutely. If you have any more questions, or if you need follow-up to anything, if it's not clear, or I sound more rambling than I usually do,